Okay, I think we are live. I might wait a second just to make sure that Matt confirms that. And I think he says, oh, hey. I think we're live. All right, welcome everyone. Yes, we're live. Welcome everyone. This is the first in the Elevate Speaker Series talks, and this one is on mental performance. I am Nicole Mericle, and I will be hosting it, but we're going to hear from Addie Bracy, who is a certified mental performance coach. She is an ultra runner for Nike, and we used to run together back in my short-lived road and track days. We have Dr. Lara Pence, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist and the chief mind doc for Spartan Race. And then, of course, we have Rebecca Hammond, who is going to be going into her residency for psychiatry at Stanford. I'm sad because that means that she's leaving me as my roommate, but I'm super excited for her. So to get started, I'm going to ask a few questions, and then for anyone who's watching, if you have questions, feel free to put them into the comments and we can pull them in as we go. So my first question, just to get things started, is how would you all say is the best way to set goals? And I guess for this question, let's say setting goals specifically for races. What do you think are the best things to cue off of and the best like reference points? Maybe Addie, you can start us off.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think for me, at least when I reflect on like my athletic career, there was a point in time when I felt pretty disconnected from like what I was trying to achieve performance-wise and how much I felt pulled to achieve that. And I think I realized that especially in objective sports, there's a lot of almost like inheriting goals from other people, or, you know, maybe like it getting too focused on just being faster or outcomes or whatever. And sometimes when you stop and think about it and kind of, I guess, analyze what speaks to you personally and kind of how that ties in, you know, to your values and kind of the life you want to live, at least since I started doing that, I feel a lot more connected to those goals. And then I guess on a more like tangible aspect, a lot of people, I see a lot of athletes making outcome or performance goals and then kind of stopping there. And I think the way I look at it is ultimately that provides a lot of direction for training and preparation. But even though people kind of fight me on this sometimes, I tend to think outcomes in and of themselves are like a little bit out of our control. And instead I think of outcome goals as being like a product of executing the things you can, like in the moment, in the performance. And so making sure to add kind of process goals and checkpoints, like whether it's more on a macro scale of a training cycle, but also a micro scale of in a race. At least I can reflect and think if I had, you know, one goal to run a specific time in a 10K or a steeplechase, you know, 1 mile in, if I'm off that time, it's kind of like, I don't even know what to focus on anymore because there goes like the only goal I had made. So encouraging athletes to set goals that keep them present and kind of give them tangible direction, like in a performance, in training, et cetera, and not just stopping at outcome.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I really like what you said about setting goals to keep yourself present almost, because it's true that if you start a race or start a rep or whatever and you don't achieve that one goal, like now do you not try at all? No, like you still have to have a sort of second tier goal maybe. So sometimes this also kind of ties into pre-race nerves or even pre-workout nerves. I set the goal of doing my best. And that can vary in the moment, but your best is something that is always accessible because your best in any given moment varies based on the moment. Like maybe the conditions are bad, maybe you're tired, but you still have a best. And so going for that best is the most important thing, sort of. And coming out of it, thinking about whether you were focused and trying your hardest, that's maybe a better goal. That said, I do definitely set like sort of benchmark goals, and kind of if we're talking, it's hard with sports like OCR with varying course lengths and course types. You can't exactly set a time goal, but you can set a goal like try and get through all the obstacles clean or something like that. And with races where it is more sort of standardized, I do definitely set time goals, but it is dangerous, as Addie says, because it's true that you're not always going to reach your time goals, and that doesn't mean that you failed. Every race, even if you don't reach that time goal, is still building. It's still an experience that you can learn from. And so if nothing else, and actually it's a huge thing in itself, working through a race where you know that you're not going to reach that goal is almost more powerful than working through a race where you do reach a goal, because that's a mental experience that you can really build off of. Oh my God. So Robert Killian ran a High Rocks race, which is like an hour-long, super grueling race, where he tore his calf like 10 minutes into the race, and he freaking finished. So that's not something that I recommend necessarily, but that experience that he put himself through, that's, that means that if he has the mental capacity to, if it's freezing cold and he's super hypothermic and he has to finish a race, he'll be able to do it just because he decided to finish that race. So that's kind of, I guess, something to put into perspective. But yeah, I'll stop.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, too, as like the feelings person, maybe, I always like to think of, very similar to what Addie said, like process over product. And oftentimes in my work, when people are setting goals, like they're setting numerical goals, or sort of like what, oftentimes people use the SMART acronym for like measurable goals. But I like to really ask people, how do you want to feel? Right? So how do you want to feel at the end of the race? How do you want to feel at the end of the competition? Do you want to feel confident? Do you want to feel like you had fun? Do you want to feel like you put in hard work? Right? Like, what is sort of the feeling that you want to walk away with that goes beyond a so-called measurable goal, but really can just tune into your body and your emotional state and become sort of more self-aware from that perspective. The other thing that I encourage all of my clients to do, athletes included, is make sure that in some way their goal, whatever that goal may be, is in alignment with their value system. And I think for me, this is really, really critical, because if you're working towards a goal, but it's not in alignment with what you really value and the principles by which you choose to live your life, then it's not going to show up. It's not going to be meaningful for you. It's not necessarily going to show up and land on you in a meaningful way, even if you accomplish that goal. And if it's in particular a value that you don't really care about, like, for example, if you're not really a competitive person, but people are saying go out there and compete, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's what everybody's saying, so that's going to be my goal. And last year I got this, and so this year I want to be this. You're going to lose your steam if you're trying to achieve a goal, a process goal, or a feelings goal that isn't really in alignment with what you value. It's just not really going to work, because it's not in integrity for you. So I would say those two things, from my perspective, are really important. Kind of thinking again, like, how do I want to feel? And then what's the value here? Like, what is the value that I'm trying to align any of these goals with, that matters to me, like, deeply?
Awesome. I like that. I guess, quick question. Addie, can you give us an example of like what your goals are for your next race, for instance, or for a past race?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess I can, even to reference what I was talking about earlier, I think there was a point when being a track racer, like you mentioned, you kind of exist in this system of either getting faster or what's the point, kind of. And I think I started to kind of again, inherit that or adopt that. And I wasn't connecting with it. So not only was I not running faster anymore, but I also I didn't want to stop running, but I didn't feel pulled by that in that sense. And so that, I ended up switching sports to a sport where similarly times really are kind of irrelevant. I could guess maybe to the nearest hour what most of my races are, but I don't really know. So in that context, for me, it's more about the experience and in recognizing that I've been running competitively for 20 years and I'm just slowly getting slower, and that's okay, because my goal is now to, experience new places and to connect with people over, a sport that's really meaningful to me. And it just plays a different role in my life now than it used to. And I can still perform well by my new set of standards, but it is different than it was, 5 or 6 years ago.
Cool. I have a question for you all. When is it okay to have goals that completely rely on what other people's performances are as well? Like, say, like, I want to win the world championship. Like, well, it depends on what, a few hundred other people do. Like, what is that okay? Is that like an okay goal? Or am I like setting myself up to fail at some point and be disappointed or, yeah.
I think any goal is okay. Like there's nothing wrong with any goal, like in that case, that might be your motivating factor for training. Once you're in the race, hopefully, even if you know that you're not going to win, you still, you should have some kind of idea for like, you should generally like nurture your kind of in the moment goals that Addie and Lara have been talking about. So that when you realize that you're not going to win, if that happens, you're still going to, perform, I would say. But I think that those goals are fine. I have those goals. Yeah, I have a goal maybe, but those, so, the people who perform at their best often have kind of outrageous goals. People who perform really well are often like sort of lazy narcissists who think they're, God. I mean, like that can help. Like those kind of crazy mindsets aren't very sustainable long-term necessarily. They're not that great for your like interpersonal relationships, but they do sometimes help you perform. So.
Yeah. And I'd say two things about that. One, like, I think this sort of also speaks to like whether or not it's okay for women to be competitive, and you can be competitive and like want to go out there. I don't know if we can swear on YouTube. So like, and kick some butt, and that's totally not only okay and normal, but like, yes, like bring that on. It's totally okay to want to be competitive and want to beat other people. I would say the one thing that I would caution people on is to attach their worth and value to the completion of that goal, because then you're attaching your worth and value as a human to somebody else's performance. And that's where it gets dicey. But I would say like go out there blazing and want to kick some A, and, just make sure, as Becca said, that like you have some other goals in mind. And at the end of it, if the outcome is not as you hoped, that you don't feel like your worth and value as a human is being chipped away.
Awesome. So kind of to go off of that, how do you build confidence? I think this is a question that a lot of women in particular struggle with in obstacle racing. So yeah, what would you say were our tips for building confidence?
One of the most specific tools that I give almost every single athlete I work with. When I think about times when confidence matters most to me, it's usually right before a performance, or leading up to it, or getting close to a performance maybe. And it seems like I'm sure I'm not the only one where the night before my mind tries to convince me of all these different things, like I'm not ready, or I don't belong here, or I should have done more, I should have done this. And you get kind of caught up in believing these stories that maybe aren't really true. So something that I do myself now, because that actually is probably my biggest struggle as an athlete, is like pre-race anxiety and nerves the night before, the week of, it's so cheesy, but it's so effective, is keeping a confidence journal, which is very similar to a gratitude journal in terms of, every day, every week, or maybe big workout days. At the end of the day, you're kind of writing down a few things that could add to your confidence, that help you know that you're better, stronger athlete than you were yesterday or a week ago. And it's twofold, because one benefit is you're constantly looking for those things that make you feel confident every day. But for me, the biggest benefit is that I take my journal to my races, and then the day before, when I'm freaking out and panicking and thinking that I wasn't ready, I kind of have this real life evidence that conflicts with this made up story that my mind's telling me, like, I'm not ready. I have this book of things that says, like, actually I am ready, and here's why, and the things that I did. And for me, it's been super effective.
So you'll literally write down like, oh, I had this good workout today, or, I
all have to even be performance, like, for me, like nutrition, or having a better balance even, like I feel like I have a really good balance of different aspects of my life, or I ran the most vert I ever ran 2 weeks ago. So stuff like that you kind of just track along the way. And then in 10 weeks, when I'm running 100 miles the next day, I can, calmed down by realizing like, oh, wow, actually I've been building all these confidence points for the last like 3 months.
Awesome. I like that.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Another sort of simple tool to use, visualize yourself doing things with ease, like going through the obstacles gracefully. And then kind of also realizing that other people, like if you feel like you're not ready and you're going to do horribly, realize that there are other people who feel the same way. Like there are multiple other people, probably most of the other people you're racing against feel the same way. And like even just realizing that you're not alone in that feeling and that feeling is normal and okay, can help as well. But that confidence journal thing, that sounds like an excellent tool. Another kind of weird thing that I do sometimes to address confidence in other contexts is sort of practicing this mental posturing where like I enter a room and I think to myself, this is all for me. Like this whole party, this is for me. Like that's kind of it's like a weird thing to think about. But if you actually let yourself believe that for a second, that can be pretty powerful and weird. And it makes you realize like, whoa, like there are people who like go through their lives thinking this. And it's also possible for me. They don't, things aren't there for them any more than they are for me. So they're little things that you can kind of practice on your own time. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
My climbing coach actually, he mentioned something similar to that. He said, I want everybody to practice walking into the competition and knowing that or thinking that people are there to watch you perform.
Mm-hmm.
Like people came to watch me, like I'm like the star of the event or something. Which I thought was funny. It was like he said like Michael Jordan did it or something. So I guess if he did it, it's good enough for me.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of what both Addie and Rebecca said. I mean, I call them resilience data points. I love that you call them confidence points, because I also think that we can take those data points from other areas of our life that don't necessarily have to do with what we're doing at that moment, and like weave them into sort of like the fold of our DNA and who we are. Because first of all, like humans are not as good at compartmentalizing as we think we are. So like inevitably things are being woven in all the time out of our consciousness. So like, let's consciously do it on purpose. And so I think too, like thinking about all of the times in your life when you overcame something that you didn't think you could. And it doesn't have to be this massive event. Like it could literally be, I went to work that one day when I really wanted to call in sick because I really didn't want to be at my job, but you didn't, you went to work, so I think too, like just calling up all of those moments as much as you can to just sort of like fill your jar of all of the reasons, like Addie said, why you deserve to be there. You've earned your place to be there and you've trained to be there, whether it's actually through the physical work or through the mental work as well.
That's awesome. And I love that because it means that it's like practicing noticing those things also, which helps
totally.
You, like when you overcome little things in the future, you will notice that you are overcoming as opposed to just, brushing by those things and noticing only when you don't overcome, for example. That's awesome.
Yeah, 100%.
What about mottos or like small sayings? Do you ever use things like that?
Yeah, I do. I have a mantra I say every day, and I encourage all of my athletes and every human being that I ever work with or come into contact with do also have a mantra. Mine's super simple. I'm wild, I'm wonderful, and I will succeed. And I literally say it to myself every single day. And I recommend that everyone, there's so much data on like positive psychology having an impact on one's performance that it's like, how are we still at the point where people want to ignore that? Like, and it's so easy to do. So even if it's like the thing that you don't necessarily believe, like I think sometimes people have these wide, big positive affirmations that they're told, like tell yourself you're beautiful every morning. Well, that wasn't my jam. Like, first of all, I don't care if I am or not. So like, I didn't want to say that to myself, but like what mattered to me is like what I wanted to exude and how I wanted to contribute in the world. So yes, I totally do. And I think other people definitely should.
Kind of a repeating theme here is like finding the thing that works for you. So like, maybe for somebody else, I'm beautiful, but like realizing that if somebody recommends something for you, like try out different versions and maybe you'll find something that really sticks. I don't personally have a mantra that I say every day, but I am now thinking that I will develop one. But during races, to kind of like calm myself down, I'll sometimes say like, it's just you and the course. If I'm starting to just kind of bring myself into the moment. And then like compete is another one, just kind of simple one word, but yeah.
I love that.
Cool. Okay, so one thing that I've dealt with personally, and I know a lot of people in obstacle racing have dealt with as well, is anxiety over certain parts of a race. So for me and for a lot of people, it's the spear throw. It's something that it's a really high failure obstacle, has somewhat a bit of luck to do with it. So going into something like the spear throw, or if somebody asks a question just about having anxiety over other obstacles that have caused them problems, or have like a fear of heights, the really tall obstacles, what would you suggest for approaching those?
I think one thing I always do, because it makes me feel better, like I struggle with anxiety too, and it makes me feel better to recognize why that's happening, like biologically, and why it's actually, you know, something that happens in our bodies and in our brains to keep us alive, kind of. And when you can kind of understand the physiology of what's happening and what anxiety really is, which is, you know, the fight or flight, you know, our sympathetic nervous system kind of getting charged and revved up. And one of kind of the side effects of that is like a narrowed focus, or is feeling like, you know, I would imagine, I've never thrown a spear before, but I would imagine it's something like, another symptom is, you know, like you get sweaty palms, or your heart rate increases, or your respiration rate increases. And I would imagine for something that's maybe pretty specific, needs to be executed in a certain way, like that's really a very beneficial state to be in. Where it might be, and something that makes it hard with CR racing is that might be fine for running, or that might be fine for climbing something. And so I would imagine that kind of coming in and out of those states is tough, or kind of turning down the volume a little bit on that sympathetic nervous system to execute that obstacle could be hard. But there's so many techniques that are super effective with that, one of which is breathing. People, I think, sometimes associate, like, you know, just taking slow, calm breaths with, I don't know, like meditation and Zen and mindful, and it is, but it also has a pretty, I've seen it on screens with people hooked up to sensories. It has a very concrete causes a physiological reaction in your body that turns down, again, the noise on that sympathetic nervous system. I worked at the Olympic Training Center with athletes who were shooters, and Olympic shooters, which I think is pretty similar, and seeing the difference in how they were able to execute something so specific when they could kind of control that a little bit is so effective. So that's like, everybody can breathe. And so it's something that you can have in your back pocket and pull out immediately. And I think that it would help with some of those symptoms that are getting in the way of executing a skill that you know.
What specifically, is there like a certain breathing exercise? Yeah,
so there's a certain frequency. It's called resonant frequency, but it's a 10-second breath cycle where you have a slightly longer exhale. And what it targets the vagus nerve. So it literally, like, the best way to describe it is it turns down the sympathetic nerve. So even breathing, 4-second inhale, 6-second exhale, 2 or 3 times, you watch the data on a screen with someone, it's pretty immediate. So yeah, 10 seconds, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out roughly is usually what you're looking for in that context.
Okay, so I'm trying to think how long it takes to like set up for the spear throw, and if you could do that within the time of like pulling. So you have to pull the spear throw towards you, flake the rope over the barrier. So I guess if you could probably be doing that during that time, and that could probably help.
And I would say even just, if you're relatively familiar with the course, I mean, depending on what level you are, whether you're like competing in elite or age group or just doing it for fun too, like if you know the spear throw's coming up, even as you're running towards it, beginning to get a handle on your breath can at least set you up that when you're there, it feels a little bit more doable. Because I completely agree with Addie. Like this is like a surefire way to chill your body out a little bit. I mean, not wholly, but a little bit.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. Your brain feels your body feels your brain, and they talk to each other. So doctors give patients muscle relaxants sometimes to treat anxiety, which tells you that your brain feels your body relax. And it's like, oh, I'm not so anxious anymore, and so that can help you. So the slow breathing is the same thing. That's something you can control that tells your brain, oh, I'm okay, I'm relaxed. And yeah. So I agree with both those things, and starting to get a handle on your breathing as you approach the spear throw is good. Before the race, visualization again is one thing. Visualizing yourself doing it with ease. And if it's the kind of obstacle where you have to keep doing it and you can fall off and keep trying, then you can visualize yourself doing it with ease. You can visualize yourself like getting up from the ground and trying again, for example. Visualizing all those kind of positive scenarios with ease and breathing as you do it. Because sometimes when I visualize, I like kind of visualize myself struggling, and that doesn't really help. Like visualize yourself doing it gracefully. But yeah.
Yeah, and I would also. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, is there benefit in exploring all of the like what could go wrong situations?
Like in general for a race?
Just like in general for a race, yeah. Like, okay, what happens if I fail this obstacle, or what happens if the sandbags are super heavy and I'm really depleted?
In sports psychology, we call that if-then statements. If this happens, then this is what I'll do. It's having a plan. When you're trying to like figure things out in the moment, again, that's when like panic happens or choking happens. And I love that Becca, I use imagery a lot with athletes, and very rarely is it like, it is triumphant, but it's seeing yourself face challenges and then seeing yourself overcome those challenges, not seeing something, happen exactly the way you thought. So I think if you think about things ahead of time and have a plan, then it feels more familiar. It doesn't feel like your race got totally derailed, which again is what invokes that stress response, which is not what you want.
Okay. Yeah, and I would just say to sort of like, set up some internal boundaries a little bit around your what can go wrong Rolodex, because there's a lot that can go wrong, and there's like possible things that can go wrong, like the bear running across face stunning on that one race. And then there's like probable things that can go wrong. And like possible doesn't necessarily mean probable. So if if you're going over, and I totally agree, I think it's better to have a plan. Like when people say, well, I don't like to think about what's going wrong. It's like, well, you could set yourself up a little bit in that way to like not be prepared. But I do think you have to be realistic around like listing out the things that are going to go like maybe wrong versus like probably not at all wrong. And so let's not like go over in that corner.
Yeah, because it's kind of a rabbit hole. Like if you start to think about everything that could go wrong, like you really can kind of spiral into negativity. Yeah. And I mean, again, here, and like being able to sort of find strength in the moment is one of the most important things. So like once you sense that, like maybe visualizing, okay, panic, like everything's okay. Like I can do this. I'm going to try my hardest right now. Everything is possible right now, like in that moment of panic. So maybe like even visualizing just overcoming panic, because that's kind of a broadly applicable, thing that applies to anything going wrong.
Well, and I think that's a good point in the sense that like too, a lot of people are not going to have access to a spear before a race. And so they're like, well, if I were to recommend, which I probably would, like expose yourself to some of these things before you go in, if you can. And they're like, how am I supposed to expose myself to a spear? Maybe not, but expose yourself to a situation where you're sprinting up to something and you're going to try and work on your breath. It's like, I think especially with breath work, a lot of people don't practice it necessarily as much as they should. And then they get to the point where they need it and they're like, oh, wait, what was it? Like 2 seconds, 4 seconds. I can't remember. And they they panic out of control. So I think too, exposing yourself just to situations like Rebecca said, that increase your panic or increase your anxiousness or decrease your confidence, and seeing how you can respond in those moments can be helpful.
I like that. So basically, you want to go over what could go wrong in a race, but you don't want to do that probably like the night before or the day of. Like keep that for like maybe further out, and then day of have already practiced your breath and then have that in your back pocket to use. And then think positive. Let's see here. Okay, so I want to know what is this is for mainly Addie and Becca. What are your processes for your pre-race to perform your best? Like we're thinking night before or day of. And specifically, I know Becca, especially in college, like you've had a lot of like pre-race anxiety that you've had to work through. So maybe starting with you, like what have you done to deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in college, I was kind of a mess. Like I hadn't really sorted that out yet, but I still was okay. So that's one thing to realize, that even if you feel like you're a mess and even if you're not sleeping at all, like it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So that's just kind of the first general step. I would say like if we're like, I try to get sleep, but I also try not to stress about sleep, because stressing about sleep will make it harder to sleep. So 2 nights before, I would say, is the most important night for sleep for me, I find. If the night before I don't get as much sleep, it's okay if I slept okay 2 nights before. I make sure I'm fueling properly. I mean, these are all kind of the physical things that I do, but I would say in general, if you come up with a routine and then you stick to it, that can be calming, because then you can just sort of like execute your routine and don't have to think too much. You remove the unknown. But that said, you know, sometimes you're going to get to a race and there's not going to be any pasta available the night before, and you're used to eating pasta. So also realizing that routine that you've set up, even though it's worked in the past, like it's okay if you don't follow it perfectly, like it's going to be fine. So the purpose of the routine is to kind of like take away unknowns. It's not because the routine is necessarily, you know, optimal and super important. Yeah, I guess those are what I would focus on. But is that kind of what you were getting at? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you said, because I think the most powerful thing that ever happened to me was I didn't sleep at all the night before a marathon, and I almost wasn't going to race. I called my coach and was like, I didn't sleep 1 minute last night. Like, there's no way I'm going to race. And he said, you know, just start it and then just see what happens. If you need to drop out, drop out. And I ran a 6-minute PR. And so now I still don't sleep before races, but I don't attach that same meaning of, well, that means I can't race well, because you're right. It's not that big of a deal. For myself, maybe because I run really long races that I'm out there all day. I think a lot of athletes don't think about mental fatigue. Like, you know, our attention and focus is a limited resource too. And so most of us are good at maybe staying off our feet the day before a race. But when I think about my routine and planning things out, you know, several days ahead of time, a lot of it is so that I'm not rushing around the day before, like going to packet pickup, like, oh crap, I don't have my gels, just kind of trying to make all these decisions and kind of wearing myself out. So really thinking about ways to preserve that mental energy as much as possible. And then I guess the last thing I've really done is recognize what kind of mental state I need to be in to run well, which is a combination of relaxed, but also nerves are good. Like, I think a lot of us associate being anxious and nervous as being bad, but I always say I'd rather my body be kind of in that revved up state than thinking like I'm about to take a nap or something. And so it's okay to be a little bit that way. But I started to kind of note the things that pushed me over the edge a little bit, like triggers, if you will, and I avoid those things. So sometimes that means going to packet pickup 2 days before, so I don't see the people I'm racing the day before, or sometimes that means working the day before so that I'm not sitting around thinking about the race. And I think it's different for everyone, but just making sure you're taking care of yourself mentally and emotionally too, and recognizing the connection between which things make you feel good and which things don't make you feel good, which is so obvious, but many of us, I never took time to do that until more recently.
Dr. L, do you have any tips?
I mean, no, I think what both of them said was brilliant. And I mean, I would just piggyback on that last part around, really, I think athletes can be so well versed in knowing the importance of physical recovery before a race, and like physically tapering, you know, like what's your taper plan? And all they talk about is the physical stuff, but you don't talk about like the mental stuff as much. Like, maybe you need to take a day off work if you can, if that's a possibility. You know, maybe if you have children, the day before your race, they need to go on a play date for a little bit. So you're not, you know, like, or maybe you just order food and you don't cook that night for the kids, you know, whatever it is that like gives you that respite, I think is so, so important. So I love that you said that, Addie, because it's like, it's just so critical, that piece of things.
Definitely. And planning out that, those two, the day before the race and the race day, super important. Like when you're going to do what, like if you're flying into Dallas, like planning out ahead of time, how you're going to get from there to the hotel and like every little thing where you're going to eat, that can help. So.
Yeah. And I would say too, like to piggyback off of that, Rebecca, that this is also where boundaries come in, because oftentimes when you go to a competition, there will be people that want to see you that you haven't seen in a long time. And so they'll be like, let's go out, but the night before, let's meet up. And it's okay to say no. It's okay to set that boundary because you realize what's best for you in that moment and what's going to be best for your competition, and not necessarily say yes. Or like if Mappy Davis wants to do an interview with you, you can say no. I know this is his channel, so he'll probably not like me for saying that, but like, you know what I mean? It's like you can set those boundaries so that you are protecting yourself. And that's totally okay, totally normal, totally human, and super healthy.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was like 2 years ago, Lindsay and I, and probably Becca too, we were all in interviews like all day long before the Spartan Race World Championships. And we were all just like mentally super duper drained. And it was just something that like none of us had really, none of us like planned well. Like, I don't think, like I didn't have lunch that day and I was like dehydrated. And I was like, man, I'm never doing that again. Like, I'm
Totally.
just, maybe one interview. I don't know. Like I can't do that. But yeah, like a lot of people also go to races for the social aspect and probably don't take into consideration the day before that can be mentally draining for them or for some people. So that's good to note. So the next question is, what are your tips to becoming more self-motivated in training?
I mean, motivation is my favorite topic because I think so many people think about motivation as a feeling or an emotion, and I think about motivation as like an action. And looking at it that way for me reframes. I don't put pressure on myself to need to feel a certain way to get training in. It's an action that I've committed to, and when you can separate that, you don't need to feel like training to still get out and train. Obviously, like meaningful goals, like we were talking about earlier, and something that you want to commit to is important to do that. But when you can take away the pressure to need to feel like it, I don't feel like it a lot of the time, but it's worth it, and I'm still going to do it. And sometimes I do, but when you can separate that and separate from I feel motivated versus like I am motivated and I'm going to do it regardless, that for me has been super helpful.
That's like super freeing because it's hard to control how you feel, but you can control what you do. And if you are beating yourself up over not feeling the right way, that's like an added layer of that's making it more difficult to train. So I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I like that too. It's funny, Addie, that you said that like motivation is my favorite thing to talk about, because I feel like I'm like the same, but the opposite, in the sense that I like feel like we talk about it way too much when it's like we're kind of missing the boats. Like we got to get moving, like you said. Like, I mean, first of all, like as humans, if we operated off of feeling all the time, we would be frazzled and get nothing done half the time. So like it doesn't really work that way. So So I think the idea of really, thinking, I always think that like you got to get moving. Like momentum breeds motivation from my perspective. And that's not necessarily even like moving in your training, but it's like moving to like set yourself up to do different things, like putting out your workout gear, like doing the stuff that sort of like sets you up for the whole thing, I think can be really helpful. But, I think too, like sometimes when it comes to the brain, it's like, for especially, high performance athletes and that are like doing the really hard stuff, like your brain isn't necessarily motivated to do that because it sucks. It hurts, and your brain doesn't like want to put you in a situation where it feels like its survival is at threat. So it's not like, if you're looking for that feeling, it's going to be sometimes really hard to find, because there are some people that are motivated to be in pain, but many are not. And that's totally normal.
Yeah. The momentum is important. So even if that is, so reducing the activation barrier for starting. So setting out your workout clothes the night before so that in the morning you have to make no decisions, because that like it's mentally taxing to make decisions, and you're going to avoid that. And that's going to be another like excuse or another like thing to get caught up in not starting. If instead of focusing on the workout ahead, you're focusing on, okay, I'm going to now get in my car, like focusing on one step at a time, the very next step, it makes you more in the moment so that you can be more kind of action oriented, be sort of like action, like motivated via action, as opposed to getting too caught up in the feeling of lack of motivation. Because a lot of those feelings that kind of paralyze us, it's your brain like thinking a little too far ahead and like planning out all these possible scenarios a little bit too much. So if you can kind of ground yourself in the present moment, you can you find that you can actually do whatever you want. Like, like people have trouble. Well, anyway, I'll end there.
Sweet. Addie, since it's your favorite topic, are there any other tips on motivation that you want to say?
Gosh, I think I said that a little bit sarcastically, but because I think there's such a misconception about it. I think that's what we talk about, because I think, kind of like Dr. Lara said, it's like, I mean, as all of us elite athletes, that's not anything I think about. Like, of course I'm motivated. I just do it. So I think that's the biggest piece. But I think that the process goals we talked about earlier can be good too, because you can kind of have checkpoints that are closer. Sometimes for me, when I think about my motivation being the lowest, it's when whatever my goal event is like pretty far away, and I feel like it's inconsequential. Like, it's okay if I don't run today. I'm not racing my race isn't for a couple more weeks or months or whatever it is. So if you at least have something more present to focus on, I think that accountability can be helpful. But yeah, I think I said it a little bit sarcastically, but it's just, it's not something it's just something you decide. You don't have it or not have it. Like, you just make the decision and then that's it. And I guess that the second thing I would say though, I don't know that I've ever dreaded a run or a workout or whatever, and then at least started it and regretted it. Like, every time that I've made myself just go out for 1 mile, I usually finish the run, or I'll just do core. I won't do like a whole lifting session, and then I end up doing it. So just give yourself, kind of like Becca said, like a smaller piece to pick off instead of a 10-mile run on the calendar. Just do 2, and then you'll probably end up doing more. Just kind of making it more realistic or more achievable.
It kind of reminds me of, so I like to swim. I swim as cross training a little bit. And the worst part of swimming is like the 5 seconds before I get in the pool. And like, as I'm getting in the pool, it's like this like rush of cold. And it's like insane how much I dread it. Like, I dread it so much, and it lasts for 2 seconds. And then as soon as I'm in the water, I'm like, oh, I'm totally fine. I'm not cold. Everything is okay. But it's like getting into the pool in that like 2 seconds. Sweet. So the next question is, so in obstacle racing, I think maybe more than normal running races, we see defeat often in failing obstacles. So how would you say what are some tips to overcome the defeat when you miss an obstacle, when you fail something?
Well, just, I think, in some ways, like that's true. You see defeat, but you also see like game changing, because of that. And nothing in so many ways, like to me, one of the most exciting things about obstacle course racing is nothing is predictable. And so when you fail an obstacle, if immediately your mind goes to like, well, now I'm out, then maybe you need to get more familiar with obstacle racing, because like anything can happen. And so if Rebecca fails an obstacle and sees Nicole sail through, she may get to the next obstacle and see Nicole doing burpees. So I think, to me, like, that's actually one of the most exciting parts about obstacle course racing. And I think one of the really unique parts is that actually a failure doesn't necessarily mean you're out of the game. And so if you can begin to sort of have that perspective, I think that can certainly help you along the way. And then I guess the other part that I would say is, especially for the newbies who are coming in, like, failure happens at the elite level. Like, failure is sort of part of obstacle course racing. And so to also like begin to remember that, like, you know, it's a lot of people, like it's hard to have a clean race. And so if you're new and you're failing obstacles, like this is part of the jam, you know, and it's not necessarily even going to go away when you get up to that elite level. So I think to just sort of like begin to think of the sport that way, different than other sports where that maybe is not quite as possible, or sort of not the frame that's there, if that makes sense.
A suggested mantra for these sorts of situations is anything is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Anything is possible. You don't know what's going on. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. So just maintain hope in that moment. And yeah.
I guess, I mean, having never done an obstacle course race, thinking about that, I would usually, like, making a mistake can kind of shift your mindset into then trying not to do something, like trying not to mess up again versus like an active participant in what's happening. My college coach used to always say in the middle of a race, he would scream at me, make the race happen, don't let the race happen to you. And so sometimes I think once we make a mistake, we then start moving forward with like, crap, I don't want to like mess up on this obstacle. And then as soon as you're trying not to do something, your brain has a hard time comprehending that. It's like you never look where you don't want to go. So anything that you can do to shift to the present, whether that's, I'm big on like attentional control. So it could be whatever, you know, strategy you needed to shift your attention to what's productive for you, whether that's counting your breaths for a few seconds, whether that's just looking ahead to what's next, whether that's counting your steps, anything that kind of takes your mind away from the past and what just happened, or from the future and worrying about what's going to happen and just being like where your feet are.
There's no use dwelling on that mistake. Like immediately, like start over. It's like you're reborn. Like you don't need to think about that failure. Just move forward. So yeah. So do whatever it takes to get yourself back to the moment.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah. To touch on what Dr. L said, I think for some reason there is this false appearance that the elite racers don't fail obstacles. And it does happen even like on the men's side, on the women's side. You see probably like a lot more failures than people think. And I think one of the reasons why it's not so evident is that doesn't show up in race results. You know, like you look at race results and you just see the placing and time, which is kind of, I don't know, I think that it would be really interesting if you also had this other category of like, you know, it was a clean race or somebody had 1 failure, 3 failures, whatever it was. But I think it's too logistically difficult right now. But yeah, fear of failure is something that it's a theme that comes up often when I'm talking to women who are maybe fearful of getting into obstacle racing. It's like they don't feel like they're prepared. They're worried about failing things. Which actually that may be a good question. Like, how do you approach something that you think you have like a high chance of failing?
I think that's why we all do this. I mean, that's what makes it so exciting. I always tell everyone, if you're lining up for anything, you're already doing something that most of the population is not doing. And we exist in a bubble sometimes, and we don't recognize like anybody listening to this, anybody in any kind of race is so amazing to be even trying it. And failure is part of it. And to me, that's kind of exciting. It's a byproduct of trying something hard. It is failing. And so the only way not to fail is to not try anything hard. And that's not very fun. So kind of normalizing what that means and being willing to be vulnerable and see what happens and take away the negative stigma of what failing means. Because to me, failing means that I tried something really hard and, you know, learn from it. And I think sometimes too, having that negative relationship with it stands in the way of learning about how you can do better next time. Like you have a bad race and you just don't want to think about it. There's races I haven't even looked at the results in my entire life because I don't even want to think about it. But then you're kind of robbing yourself of that chance to analyze it and see, well, like what could I have done better and how can I do better in the future? So I'm not afraid to fail. I used to be, but now, you know, it's just part of it. And I would rather be the person standing on the start line, still trying and failing than choosing, you know, not to line up.
It's an awesome perspective. Yeah.
If you lose the fear of failing, then you're invincible in a way. So that's, yeah. So I guess like embracing the fact that you might
Which
fail.
kind of comes just with practicing things that are, yeah.
Totally.
Well, and I think too, like that, this kind of goes back to like the confidence points and the resilience data points is like, we all have failure data points too, like times in our life outside of sport or, in different arenas where we've fallen, face first in the mud, literally or metaphorically. So, if we can even call those up sometimes, just when we're like doing the mental work and asking ourselves a question like, how did that become an opportunity instead of a threat? I think that can be really helpful because I can think back to various failures that I've had and think to myself, but like a day after that, like it opened this door for me, or I met this person or whatever it is. So like, I think that there's always that way to look at it too, which I think can be helpful. And the other part is that like, it can sometimes just be sucky. Like failing can just be sucky and that can be okay too. We don't always have to like spin into like the benefits of it. Like we can tolerate like that sucked. And because you'll have a lot of people, if you fail, probably say like, well, but what about this? And what about that? And oh, but you did so well. And sometimes you're just like, that sucked. And that's okay too. And then you can like move on to the other part as well of the wisdom, but it's also okay for it to just kind of suck sometimes.
I like that. All right, so I will open it up to questions for anyone that's on here. If they have additional questions, please send them in the comments. And maybe while we're waiting to see if there is any other questions, I will say, so all of you have similar but different backgrounds. And what would you say is the most, what was like the most important lesson that you learned either in your like athletics or in your professional studies that has benefited your performance in life?
Oh gosh, mine's super easy to recall, which is I'm big. I mean, if anybody watching this like knows me at all, they know that like my favorite word is curious. And I think in my personal life, in my professional life, and even in my life as an athlete, the minute that I shift from my critical ego to my curious ego, like the world opens up, and I'm more liberated. I'm more interested. I'm more engaged. I'm more connected to other humans, to myself, to my work. So, and what I mean by critical ego and curious ego is like the critical ego is the part of you that's like, sorry, I keep wanting to swear. Gosh, why did you do that? And the curious ego is like, what was that about? Like, what's going on for you? And in my professional work, as soon as I like stopped doing therapy with my clients and like tried to keep doing CBT and like all this like modality work that I had learned as a professional and just got curious with them, like, what is that about? I have no idea. Like, let's talk about it. I became a much better clinician. So from my perspective, it's all about curiosity. And I think this ties back to what we just talked about too with failure is like, instead of being critical about it, like be curious about it. Like what was going on for you that like led you to not take those deep breaths before the spear, right? Like what's up, as opposed to like, gosh, what's wrong with you? So to me, that's been completely transformative in all arenas of my life.
The one that comes to mind for me is it's so cheesy and I recognize that it is, but when I was in grad school, I had a professor who he was incredible. He wouldn't call our exams or tests. He called them celebrations of knowledge. And I took that forward into training and I call races like celebrations of fitness. And it kind of shifted how I think about myself professionally and athletically in terms of, I think we often think we're constantly being tested and analyzed for what we're lacking or how we messed up or what we didn't know. And I used to be in that mindset for sure, of, thinking a race was a test to see like, I don't know what I didn't have on that day, but working with clients was kind of anxiety inducing. Like, what if I don't have the answers? What if I fail and I don't have the answer for them? But if you can think about it differently in terms of recognizing what you do have to offer, it's freed me up a lot to just recognize that I'm not being tested on what I don't have. I'm getting to celebrate what I do have and the knowledge I have or the ability that I do have. And I don't know why that stuck with me, because it is so cheesy, but it's just a really cool perspective, I think, that I've taken forward.
That's awesome.
No, that's
I
great.
like that. My coach used to say he would tell us to look forward to race day like it was Christmas, which I think in college I thought that was like kind of silly, but he would like wake up. He would like, when we saw him in the morning, he'd be like super duper excited. And he'd be like, it's Christmas. And so it kind of became like a little bit of a joke, but it made us laugh. And I think that it also made us kind of look forward to race day as well. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Same thing.
That's awesome. And that, I mean, like the feeling of pre-race anxiety is very similar to the feeling of excitement. So if when you're, in the depths of anxiety, you can start to think about how this is an opportunity. This is exciting. This is excitement. I'm excited. That can sometimes help. Because it really is. It's an opportunity to like see what you've got. Like, it's for yourself to see what you've got. And even if you fail something or something didn't go as expected, like in that moment, well, what do you have now? You still have something. Let's see what I have now. Which kind of ties into my sort of lesson, which I already mentioned before. You can always do your best. Like your best is shifting in every moment. Your best is not something that you did 2 years ago. Your best is not something that exists in your imagination. Like your best is always possible. So if you think that and believe that, then it can become easier to kind of focus and try your hardest. So your best is always accessible. That's what I've kind of told myself. Like before races, when I'm really nervous, it's like, oh my God, like I'm really tired or I'm really sore. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like I can still do my best right now. So let's see what that is. Let's be curious. Let's be excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll say my 2 cents too, maybe. So when I was in high school, I had this teammate who was super negative. She was like one of my really good friends, but she was like very negative about herself, about like situations, had like a ton of anxiety. And I kind of unknowingly, because I think this was why, but because I was around her and because I was always kind of like being surrounded by these like negative things from outside, I became like stupid positive, like about everything. So even if I like felt terrible and like, like the conditions were horrible and whatever, I had like practiced basically hearing something negative and like immediately saying something positive in my head, to the point that like things didn't really faze me, kind of at like a young point in my career where like, anything could be going wrong. And I would just like tell myself like, nope, it's great. And it seems to have like worked for a lot of things. And that's one thing that I think forgot about that when it came to like my spear throw game. And I found myself during like the entire race, I would like keep on dwelling on the spear throw as it was approaching. And I couldn't help but have negative thoughts, until I was like, wait a second, like maybe I should try that like stupid positivity thing. And so instead of like just trying to not think about it, I started racing, and like that's all I would think about. But I would be like, man, I'm gonna nail that spear throw, and I would just like keep on thinking about how like awesome it was gonna be. And it totally shifted my perspective. And I do think it helped me start to make more spear throws.
That's awesome. It's always easier to work with feelings than to try and stop them, because as soon as you try and stop them, then you have it, and then you punish yourself for having it, and then you still have it, and it's like way worse. So I love that your friend like trained you. That's brilliant.
She doesn't even know it, but yeah. Okay, let's see. We have a couple questions. Let's see. What are they? I think it's more about just like racing in general, obstacle racing in general. What would it take to become elite in running and obstacle training? Do you think that women and men like yourselves will be able to live off the prize money? So yeah, I don't know. I think that, there are definitely professional athletes right now who are basically living off of sponsors and prize money.
Yeah.
That answers the
You need
question.
to be fast and strong, and also like having a good media presence and like being being engaged with social media is important, can be important. Yeah.
Well, does anyone else have anything else to add before we sign off? We covered all the questions that came in beforehand, and I think we touched on a lot
My
of great
dog is
topics.
hearing another dog in the background.
They're barking at each other.
Ah, that's hilarious.
Well, that's probably
Thank you, Nicole.
appropriate. Thank you all for joining, and for taking the time to do this. And we will post this on Ops Bracy Media, so if anybody missed and wants to watch it, they'll be able to. And that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Bye.